Hello. During this holy month of Ramadan, the Dialogue Institute of Australia, through its New South Wales chapter, Affinity Intercultural Foundation, and now along with its Victorian chapter, the Australian Intercultural Society, or AIS, has been pretty busy over the past few days, running what we call the Ramadan Conversations program to keep us entertained, to keep us informed, and I suppose to help us get a feel of what it's like to be included in a community that currently is almost suspended. Something else that I need to tell you before we go any further, the AIS is a non-for-profit organisation that's been operating in a pre-9/11 world with the aim of strengthening mutual respect and understanding between people of diverse communities through meaningful engagement. And tonight, this is another element of that, another episode, and we're very keen that it goes off as smoothly as possible. This year marks the 20th anniversary of the AIS, and if you think about it, through its journey, it has done an awful lot of good work, and it's helped pioneer many initiatives, including the Mosque Open Days and the annual Ramadan Iftar Dinner Program. Ramadan Mubarak. My name is George Donikian. Now, we have three guests today, but before I introduce them, let me welcome someone very special, my co-host, Zuleyha Keskin. Doctor, welcome. Zuleyha is the course director and the senior lecturer at the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilization. And it doesn't end there. Zuleyha is also the co-founder of the Islamic Sciences and Research Academy of Australia, otherwise known as ISRA. Zuleyha, an awful lot of work to get ready for tonight. You look a picture, and more importantly, we have some terrific guests.
Yes, we do.
What have you made of it?
Out of Ramadan? Well,
yes,
to be honest,
Ramadan.
with Ramadan, I have to say, being an introvert, it's probably been a little bit easier for me compared to some others who are extroverts and, who sort of thrive on that social interaction, which is quite a big part of Ramadan. Having said that, though, even for myself, me, the introvert, I've sort of been, feeling it and feeling that lack of connection with people, although these kind of programs are really helpful and I guess have filled a void that was there.
Speaking of this program, having done your PhD on inner peace, are you implementing what you researched on maintaining inner peace during these COVID-19 social restrictions, which clearly, as you touched on, have impacted on just how Ramadan is playing out this year?
That's a good question. Yes, at times like this where there is uncertainty and drastic changes, I have to go back to my thesis and see what I've written about inner peace. And yes, certainly it has. I have to practice what the 90,000 words I've written. And I have to say, I think the biggest part of inner peace is trying to give meaning to situations in a way that you're able to deal with that situation. And so for me, this Ramadan has therefore been more about, I guess, reflection, seeing it more like a retreat rather than isolation, and that quiet time. Sometimes we don't like quiet time, but we can really do a lot of soul searching during isolation and quiet time. So I definitely have been doing a fair bit of focus and attaining inner peace through the process.
Good. Well, we've got some terrific guests. We have a wonderful program in store. Not only will we be hearing from three special guests who have interesting and distinct contributions to make to the public discourse, but we have a musical item as well. I think I'm going to ask you, the introvert now, to introduce our first guest. Go on, off you go.
Introduce our first guest. Thank you. Now, our first guest, I've actually known for a number of years, Professor Fethi Mansouri. He holds the UNESCO Chair in Comparative Research on Cultural Diversity and Social Justice since 2013. He is also founding director of the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization at Deakin University here in Melbourne. Among the many questions we have for Professor tonight, we are keen to hear about the impact the COVID-19 pandemic is having on society and culture, as well as identity to some degree, as these are areas which he has extensively researched on. So I would like to welcome Professor Fethi Mansouri.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the threesome. The Ramadan Conversations hour is underway, and already Zuleyha has pumped you up, has given you the best possible start. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to handball to Zuleyha and ask her to start the conversation with a question to you.
Yes. Okay, my first question, Professor Mansouri. Now, with this COVID situation that's on all of our minds, we are seeing significant changes to our society. Now, with this in mind, what kind of a new world order might emerge post-COVID-19? What will and should be its core values and guiding principles?
We are certainly starting with a big question here. Thank you very much, Zuleyha and George, for having me. It's always a pleasure to be part of these conversations that we very much need in a time of both isolation but also of deep reflection on where we are and where we're heading, I think. Well, COVID-19 is one of those things. I think it will be long discussed and long written about in terms of the significant impacts that it will have on our societies, not just in Australia but globally speaking. There are many ways of looking at COVID-19. One of them, of course, is we're looking at the public health dimension of it, which is a significant challenge, a challenge that has implications for economies, the likes of which we have not seen really, I think, since the Great Depression. Many people argue that this is probably the single most significant event since World War II, and I think it will be very hard to argue with that. Before I talk about what kind of a world we envisage might emerge post-COVID-19, I want to discuss briefly with you, and you feel free to interrupt and ask questions if you want. Talk about the impact of COVID-19 so far on our societies, because it's not just about social distancing. It's not just about trying to find the vaccines which will stop the spread of this virus. And it's certainly not just about us working remotely or engaging in remote schooling or homeschooling. I think it's much more than that. And in many ways, we talked about the hyper-connected nature of our global world. We've been talking about the interdependent nature of our connected world. And what COVID-19 really did is it's brought all of that to a sudden halt, without much of a warning, so to speak. And immediately, we basically decreased, in some cases, ceased altogether, all forms of international mobility, border crossings, border closures in many ways. We engaged in a new way of relating to one another, even within local communities. So all of a sudden, we had to readjust the way we think we can go on about our daily lives, both in relation to the immediate environments within which we live, but also in terms of how we work, in terms of how we engage locally, nationally, and transnationally. And I think all of that will, in my view, have significant impact in the future. One of the really interesting mottos I've seen coming out of Italy is that things will definitely will not go back to normal post-COVID-19, because it's that normal situation that led us to where we are right now, and we should not go back to that normal situation. So you can get the gist of the fact that there will have to be some fundamental change to the way we do things, to the way we operate globally, to the way we relate to one another as communities, as societies, and as countries. So the implications will be at many levels. Thinking about, obviously, the political situation, there are discussions about the fact that COVID-19 perhaps has given rise to new forms of governance which many of us do not feel very comfortable with, and which really impinge on a lot of notions of civil liberties, which perhaps undermine democratic deliberations. And if you think about the way we centralize decision making, not just in Australia but everywhere, decisions making have been centralized so much that people are governing by decrees. Now that goes against the very essence of democracy. You look at,
but they are national.
economic.
They are national. They aren't unity governments, though, or cabinets, aren't they? They're not. It's not one person unilaterally deciding on a course of action. We have in Australia, for example, a number of premiers from territories and states coming together with the Prime Minister of Australia and together working to create a strategy that makes sure that each jurisdiction is looked after as well as the whole.
Sure. Australia is slightly different always because of the federal nature of our governance system. So you have the states which are fiercely independent. They want to look after particular policies, including education, for instance. Whereas in other jurisdictions,
which has taken a fearful hit.
Exactly. In other jurisdictions, it's the case that the supreme leader, so to speak, centralizes all forms of decision making. I know in more than one country where either the prime minister or the president has sought special permission from the parliament to govern by decree, because they do not want to go back to parliament to get certain laws passed or certain legislation passed. They want to be able to govern. I'm not saying that's necessarily bad in the context of COVID-19. What I'm saying is that in itself represents something that we need to be very aware of and very critical of if it leads to a certain precedent in terms of governance. There are also the issues of how we are dealing with the most vulnerable amongst us. And I think this is perhaps where COVID-19 has really exposed and amplified a lot of injustices in our societies, not just local societies or national societies like Australia, but the global situation in general has been exposed to.
Is there
being
a particular
really
group that's
so
been
we'll take it.
affected?
So we'll take, for example, the fact that 1.7 billion children globally needing to be schooled from home, taught from home. And we all talk about our own experiences here, and we are in a very, very privileged situation because we have the infrastructure, we have the means, we have the state which is able to put resources towards this, and we are still finding it very challenging. Now, almost 700 million of children, in particular in the global south, in particular in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, who do not have access neither to infrastructure, nor to the resources, nor to the state capacity to actually deliver these courses. And that means that we are witnessing emerge in front of our own very eyes the manifestation of what is being called by UNESCO global digital disparities. That is, some people can do it and they can move online and continue to function, continue to educate, continue to deliver services, and others are not able to do that. And this really is a situation that should not be happening in 2020, where we talk about sustainable developmental goals and we talk about equitable economic programs across the world. So these are some of the problems that COVID-19 have really exposed quite dramatically, and I think will be one of the things that we need to look at very seriously in a post-COVID-19 world.
Professor, globalization leading right up to the COVID-19 pandemic, as you addressed so rightly, no one saw this coming. What sort of message does this put or send to the world and the leaders who have thought that globalization was the answer for everything?
It's interesting. I mean, it kind of goes both ways. In a way, because the outbreak of this virus took place in Wuhan, central China, a very industrial city, which I know very well. I visited many times. And then from Wuhan, for the virus to then find its way to Europe and Northern America and everywhere in the world, shows you that we are really now living in a very much hyper-connected world. So globalization has well and truly shaped the way we operate, the way we are, the way we live, and the way we are connected to one another in ways that are perhaps not non-reversible. But by the same token, the very fact that this virus has spread so easily across borders globally raised questions about the nature of globalization and the nature of human mobility in particular. There were some interesting articles that have been written recently that, as a matter of fact, if you want to think who spread this virus, it's those cosmopolitan Europeans who travel to China, and then from China they hop on the plane and go back to London and Italy, and so in a way it's not your kind of working class, low socioeconomic people who are responsible. It's those people who've benefited from globalization, in particular, who ended up carrying the virus. But this, on a serious note, of course, I think there are already serious discussions taking place in terms of what kind of, for instance, global supply chain we want when it comes to health products. What kind of complementarities we seek when it comes to developing resources and capacity to deal with either pandemics or natural disasters or economic crises. Or, I mean, we've seen so many of these in the last few years. There are also discussions about the nature of transnational governance. I mean, the World Health Organization, as we all know, has come under severe criticism from a number of countries, and people are asking questions: what kind of jurisdiction, what kind of powers, what kind of resources are we giving to some of these transnational organizations, intergovernmental agencies within the UN system, so that they are able to do the job that we want them to do? And in this particular case, it's a job of looking after the global health situation. So no doubt there will be many discussions to be had in relation to what we want to envisage a post-COVID-19 world to look like. It's not a knee-jerk reaction, nor should it be a knee-jerk reaction. We need to take our time to think deeply about this. You do not undo what we've done for the last 60 or 70 years in the space of weeks simply because of COVID-19, but you do take this opportunity, and we should all take this opportunity to actually reflect on what needs to be done from here on, moving on in a post-COVID-19 world, so that this kind of crisis, even if it happens again in the future, we know it will happen. It will not be perhaps COVID-19, it will be another disaster, another pandemic, another crisis. Then we are perhaps better placed to weather the storm than we have done in 2020, and perhaps than we've done previously. So there are many discussions that will be taking place, a lot of reimagining the organization of our world. Dare I say, the word reforms might be talked about and might be discussed, so that we learn from COVID-19, when we learn that there are many things that cannot go on as business as usual.
I can imagine the reimagining in an airliner when we finally lift the restrictions and consider travelling again. I don't think we'll be travelling the way we used to in a crowded aircraft filled to the brim.
It will be different.
Well, they'll be more expensive for a start.
Yeah, and just, I mean, absolutely, George. And just think about the fact that, for instance, many of us, and me included, I used to religiously work from the office. I go to Deakin every single day, and I love working from my office. Now I've discovered that I can actually work from home. Do I want to go back and work every single day from my office at Deakin? I don't know. So things like that will change, and I'm sure will change, and it will change for the better in many ways. We are learning to spend time together. We are learning that it's not necessarily the case that everyone has to get into his car or get on a plane or get on a whatever bus or a train and travel for a meeting. Now everyone is meeting online using the technology that is available to us, and so it should, in my view. In my view, there should be a lot more of this practice that stays with us after COVID-19 is well and truly finished, because it's good for the environment. It's good for our mental and well-being and health being too. And I think it's good that we are able to balance certain practices in our life so that the ultimate impact on all of us will be minimized in terms of, whether it's carbon emissions, whether it's time spent with your loved ones, whether it's balancing life and work, whether it's spending time with kids while they're doing their schoolings, and not expect the public institutions to do all of that for you. And I think perhaps COVID-19 will allow us time to think that we could actually readjust the way we live our lives a little bit, so that we manage to really achieve the meaning of the word sustainable. We talk about sustainability a lot, but we don't really know how we can achieve sustainability from a personal point of view. We expect whether the state, the government, the international agencies to do it for us. I think all of us has a responsibility to contribute to that.
We need a better bandwidth, I think. That will help.
That's yes, absolutely.
Professor,
I think
before we get you to reminisce about Ramadans in the past, especially in your early days in Tunisia when you were growing up, I want to ask you a question about education. You're right in the middle of it, in one of the best campuses in Australia. There are enormous challenges now for all these international students. What messages are we sending to them this COVID-19 pandemic season?
I agree with you, George. It's one of the best campuses, definitely in Australia. It's I'm very happy that you asked that question about education. I think there are many angles that we can bring about in talking about international education and students. International students have really contributed enormously to Australia, both society, culture, campuses in general. And I do not want to talk about the dollars they bring in because they contribute to the economy significantly. But let's not talk about
absolutely.
that.
The third biggest industry.
And the first export industry in Victoria. But more than that, they bring a vibrancy. They enrich our lives. They contribute through their creativity, through their hard work, through their contribution to the fabric of our societies, locally, nationally, and internationally. And yes, we've seen that that's going to be now hit quite badly for the next, who knows, 3-5 years. Some people are saying we'll never go back to 2019 levels in terms of international students coming to Australia. I hope we are wrong and we see more of them coming to Australia and going elsewhere to study. And but I think what COVID-19 did is, in a way, it showed that we do not know how to look after people who are not citizens, like people who don't have the citizenship that many of us enjoy here. So be it international students or asylum seekers or temporary workers or all sorts of non-citizens, we do not know how to extend a notion of care towards them. And international students have been
with much to think about. You've left us with much to think about, especially during this holy month of Ramadan. And on the subject of Ramadan, Zuleyha has a question. She wants to take you way back to those early years in Tunis and in Tunisia.
Yeah.
Well, we've looked forward a lot and what COVID's going to, how it's going to change. But before COVID times, in your childhood, what kind of a Ramadan did you have in Tunisia?
Ramadan used to be, now that you ask me that question, Ramadan used to be one of the best moments, the best month in the whole year in Tunisia. It's funny enough, it used to be always in summer. I'm not sure. I only remember Ramadan in summer in Tunisia there. So it's and as you know, summer, Mediterranean summer, it's a long day, but then it's a long night too. It has a special charm. It's we say we could smell Ramadan in Tunisia. You don't just hear Ramadan, you smell Ramadan in the streets. Wherever you walk, you can see special shops that are opening and delivering particular goods. They're making special sweets. There are special dishes with people only cook in Ramadan in Tunisia. Families gather like no other time. No other time you find large tables where people gather to break fast. Then the mosques are filled with people who go and do the prayers after breaking fast. Then from there, after the people pray in the mosques, and you find the streets of every single city and town in Tunisia buzzing with life. People do not go home till 3 a.m., George, till 4 a.m. sometimes. And that connection, that connectivity, that solidarity, that kind of human interaction
therapy.
that it's very therapeutical, absolutely, and it really enriches the soul. It feeds you, of course, in terms of your what you want to do and who you catch up with. But it's a month like no other in Tunisia, Ramadan, and we always look forward to Ramadan as kids because we know that there's so much fun to have and there's so many people to catch up with. And of course, when Ramadan finishes, as we all know, the Eid, then gets even more fun because you are showered with gifts and you bought new clothes and you're giving money, yes, and So it's all happy memories, George, and we try to recreate that here, of course, but it's not the same. We do our best to recreate that kind of, the gathering and friends, and unfortunately in COVID-19 we do not exchange visits with friends. We do the iftar dinners, which the AIS plays a significant role in and have been pioneers in doing it. We're trying to make sure that we share Ramadan with everyone else, because it's such a beautiful month.
You've certainly shared some wonderful memories with us. On behalf of Zuleyha and myself, we want to thank you and wish you Ramadan Mubarak for this season. And more importantly, we want to take the opportunity to thank you, Professor Fethi Mansouri, for being our opening guest on Ramadan Conversations this year.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, both George and Zuleyha, and look forward to watching the whole thing. Thank you very much.
Well, Zuleyha, another guest coming up. I think I throw it over to you and let you do the introductions.
I'll let you do the honors. I'll let you do the honors with this one. Yeah.
Oh, all right. Look, we're about to be joined by a very busy state MP who does a tremendous job in the Northern Metropolitan region. He's the representative I know very well because we share an allegiance to a football club. It's Melbourne City. His name is Craig Ondarchie. He's a hard worker, and he's going to give us a little insight into what's happening around us during this global emergency that has shocked an awful lot of people. It's made a tremendous impact on our lives. But let's find out from Craig just how it's impacted businesses and residents and constituents in the Northern Metropolitan region. Craig Ondarchie, welcome. I'm going to get you to turn the microphone on. Is it, Mike? Is microphone on or off?
See you?
Yeah, we can see him.
But we can't lip read you.
No, lip reading. This is where we tell some story that gets us through this impasse. Here we go. Let's see.
Okay.
I love these. This is a bit like live television. I can remember working many, many years ago with Graham Kennedy, and Graham would say to us, there's nothing more exciting working at TV. There is no seatbelt, no safety harness, but we still expect you to do your darndest to get the job done. While we're waiting for Craig to find a microphone, what did you make of Professor Mansouri?
Look, his insight is amazing. I was just thinking about, his last point about Ramadan and how it can be quite different in Muslim majority countries. Obviously, Tunisia is one of many. And with my Turkish background, I was born here, but I hear of the Ramadan and the Eid in Turkey and other Muslim majority countries. It's just very different to me that, and I often think, George, of the migrant communities that have had to come to, say, Australia or the US and trying to relive those moments. And the fact
that's a good point.
Easy.
It's a struggle, and I can remember being a part of two communities growing up, or three communities if you include the Australian community, and it was a balancing act. And I can remember in the very early days, the late 50s, early 60s in Australia, especially in Sydney. Can I just tell you? Can I just give you a sense of just how different things were in the late 50s, early 60s, there were no such things as delicatessens nor supermarkets. So, your shopping list looked very different, and you shopped daily. You didn't shop 3 weeks ahead.
Daily, wow.
There was no Costco. And in the early 50s or the middle 50s, when I was about 5, 6 or something, I can remember there were no such things as refrigerators. So this modern world of ours has brought many changes. I know you're stunned and you can't believe it, but we must understand that everything didn't happen yesterday, and that the mobile phone has only been around since the iPhone since 2007, the iPad since 2010, and the iPod I think 2004, and yet your children probably think they've been around for a lifetime.
Forever.
Their
Yeah, I went through
lifetime.
high school without a mobile. Yeah, their lifetime. I went through high school without a mobile phone. I got my first one when I was 21. And whereas my kids, yeah, they can't imagine life, through high school without a mobile phone. Yeah, life is changing very quickly. And I guess, like Fethi said, this COVID-19 is going to change. Well, hopefully for the better. This is where the inner
Let's
peace part comes in, George.
let's see if we can
You give it
change
a
our
positive
fortunes
meaning.
on. Let me see if we can change some fortunes tonight on Ramadan Conversations. Craig Ondarchie, are you welcome? It's a time for you to welcome yourself back.
Ramadan
There he
Mubarak,
is.
my friends. Ramadan
Oh, he's
Mubarak to
done
you.
that.
Lovely.
How are you?
It's good. It's good to be with you. I am very, very well, albeit we're locked down to home.
Well, look, there are some very troubling times for a great many people, a great many of your constituents. We
Yes.
touched on it just before you came on, and I want to know from your perspective. I know how busy you have been working with a number of key organisations that do some tremendous work behind the scenes that don't get enough support or acknowledgement. I just want to know, from what you've seen, from your perspective, how are the businesses coping in the Northern Metropolitan region with this COVID-19 pandemic?
You know, George, right across the Australian landscape, businesses have been struggling. But Australian business community and Australians in general are a very tough, resilient, courageous population. They've had to be. We've been through things like tragic bushfires, cyclones, floods, drought, and now COVID-19. And what I'm seeing is innovation that's off the scale, and it's something to celebrate.
So what you're saying to me is that people are showing their agility and their smarts and getting out there and thinking outside the square.
You know, there's a tenacity that I'm seeing amongst Australians at this time, particularly as we are facing some challenges around mental health, around family violence, around parental and carer stress, around the obvious economic and social challenges that we're facing right at this minute, and something that's commonly being called lockdown fatigue that we're seeing across Australia right now. And I'm seeing some people really taking it and saying, well, what can I do with this? And there's some really good news stories.
Craig, I know there's a lot of good things coming out, but you mentioned mental health and domestic violence, so I thought I'd step in, George. There too are the areas that we're hearing where there's big challenges at the moment. Domestic violence has gone up because everyone's in lockdown, they're stressed. And when there's a stressful situation, domestic violence seems to increase. Anxiety levels are high. What is your take on all these? Is there a positive side to that?
I'm seeing some members of our community doing some amazing things that are addressing some of those things. If I may give you this example, we have a number of people throughout my electorate, and certainly probably right across the country, that are stranded. They're either financially stranded, they can't get out to buy the necessities they need, or they're isolated due to COVID-19. And what I've seen over the last few weeks, and it just takes my breath away, I've seen the Muslim community, the Hindu community, the Sikh community and the Christian community all come together, and on a daily basis they're preparing and delivering around 1,000 meals a day in the northern suburbs. It just takes your breath away.
1,000 a day.
In the order of 1,000
that brings
a
a
day.
whole new meaning. That brings a whole new meaning to the term inclusive, Craig.
Indeed. And it goes to some of the issues Zuleyha is talking about in terms of mental health and family violence. There's some assistance packages, essential packages being provided to these families and these individuals that gives them some comfort in the day. Now, to be fair, some of them don't want to declare who they are, and quite frankly, that's okay with me. More than happy to leave it on their doorstep, ring the doorbell and step away. So they get to preserve their self-esteem, they can do something about their mental health, but they do know that we care about them.
Do they understand that, do we understand that certain cultures find it a little harder than others to say we need assistance, we need help?
You know, primarily that's what worries me. We are doing in the order of 1,000 meals a day, but how big is this number? And my call to people is reach out. Tell me your name is John Smith for all I care. We won't want to identify you necessarily, but we do want to help you.
What's the one thing that you've learnt in the last couple of weeks? The biggest lesson that's come out of this?
I've seen some innovation by businesses that has really both surprised me and delighted me. For example, there's a company that manufactures, a small manufacturer, that makes those swinging wheels, casters for hospital beds. And with the advent of this pandemic, they have chased international markets where they wouldn't have done so in the past, because they struggle against the cost parameters around some of our lower labour cost countries. But there's a company in Melbourne that make these wheels that have bid for a contract in the US. And I'm delighted to tell you they have won that contract, and they're producing 30,000 of those casters per week. They've added two shifts. They've employed more people. They're packaging up and putting them into the belly of a jumbo jet that heads internationally every few days. And the remarkable, innovative lady that runs it, Jo Felshaw, is just amazing. Here's a good news story. We're doing something on an international scale as a result of COVID-19, whereas people are saying to me, "Oh, manufacturer's dead." Well, I'll tell you what, I'm not going to the funeral. Manufacturer's dead. It's all not going so well. But here's a company that stepped up and said, let's find an opportunity here rather than tell everybody things are bad.
You have a background of economics. You understand the vagaries of the markets. What have you made of this challenge to the biggest markets in the world? I know you've given us a small sample of what's happening in the Northern Metropolitan region, which has excited you, but let's look Australia-wide. Are we being smart enough? Are we seeing that we have to be a lot more prepared and maybe bring some of those businesses that we've sent offshore back to Australia and see some of the production that has closed over the last 30, 40 years, maybe start, rethink, reimagine, as you touched on earlier, and do things a little bit differently, but do them because we need them.
You know, and then there's rural Australia, which we should not neglect as well.
No, exactly.
Indeed. Let me touch on that firstly then. I have to tell you, one of the most exciting things I'm seeing over the last few weeks is the energy and tenacity of the wholesale fruit and vegetable market out in Epping. They are doing amazing things in conjunction with our agricultural business right across Australia, and also helping that food production. We do some good manufacturing that supports rural and regional Australia as well. When Ford and Holden and Toyota and Nissan stopped making cars in this country, people said it was doomsday here. That's the end of manufacturing. Well, it is not. We are still making great products, even in the automotive sector, in the aftermarket area as well. We're great exporters of that. And I think to answer your question, George, we're going to become clever about this. We are going to say we can do it here. We can work collectively with the workforce, with governments, and with our markets to produce some fantastic things here in this country.
Well, Zuleyha,
I think we need you on mainstream
listening to Craig, it excites me.
It does, and we need you on mainstream media, you know, boosting everyone's morale, because we don't get these sort of stories much on mainstream media, do we?
Well, you know, Zuleyha,
how's the media cope with it, Craig? How has the media cope with it? Just reflecting for a little while. They can do a better job, surely.
Well, it's really dangerous you asking me that question, George, as a erstwhile media man. But I have to say to you that for a period of time on TV in this country, it was CSI everything. CSI Miami, CSI New York, CSI News, CSI Current Affair. It's gone to COVID everything now. And I have to tell you, when we've got through this pandemic, there's not going to be much news left for the news services, because they seem to be filled with stories about how bad things are. My challenge to news directors in this country is find some joy. Find some good news stories. Find some positive stuff that we can say to the Australian population, we can get through this together. We're tough, we're resilient, and these are the good things that are going to happen, and here's some of them right now.
I suggest you ring Peter Hitchener and give him the lowdown ASAP. He'll smarten things up. Craig Ondarchie,
that's a good point.
It's always a joy to talk to you. You and I need to get our football teams playing again. Are we likely to see sport get a kick start in the next month or so, or are we still waiting with bated breath?
Oh, look, I would like to see us all get back to the new normal life, if we can,
Yeah.
whatever that means. And I think new normal life includes spending more time with families and enjoying the basic things that we take in life, opposed to being fast-moving consumers. So I'd like to see us get back to sport and all those recreational things soon, but I think we've got to get through this. A little more patience and I think we'll be in a good place.
Craig Ondarchie, thank you for joining us on Ramadan Conversations. Really appreciate it.
Ramadan Kareem to you all. Have a blessed, prosperous time, and may you stay healthy and prosperous.
George, now we've got a performance, a musical treat from Anatolia, a common folklore song with the title Gurbet elde bir hal geldi başıma, which roughly translates to mean a state of homesickness descended upon me. It's a song we can relate to, given how we are in isolation and we are feeling the sense of separation from our loved ones. I mean, we're close to maybe immediate family, but there's a lot of people we can't see. So tonight, Emre Akın will be playing the bağlama to this folklore song, otherwise the bağlama referred to as the saz, a Persian word meaning an instrument. Over to you, Emre.
Well done. Well done. Emre, on cue, delivering the music for us on Ramadan Conversations. Our final guest for the evening is Dr. Leslie Cannold. The good doctor is a medical ethicist. She's an educator, an author of non-fiction and fiction works, and that includes the historical novel, The Book of Rachel. She's a member of the Mental Health Tribunal, currently on the Victorian Board of Nurses and Midwifery, the Forensic Leave Panel. She's done it all, Zuleyha, and she also chairs the Ethics Committee for Mary Stopes International, which provides sexual and reproductive health care to many disadvantaged women in 37 countries right around the world. And our guest also sits on the advisory board of the AIS and is the deputy chair of the Board of Mental Health Victoria, someone who understands exactly what's going on in this COVID-19 world of ours. Welcome, Dr. Cannold.
Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. Zuleyha and I have been waiting for this opportunity. And I think it's important, as someone who's so well informed and interested in ethics, in particular the values of privacy, trust, and liberty. We have a topical question for you, Doctor. And I think it's the one that will start the conversation. Now, those values that I spoke of just a moment ago come together in a current discussion which is taking place right around not only this country, but many other countries around the world. And it's to do with the use of contact tracing apps that we can download onto our smartphones. Now, we're told they will allow us to return to a more normal existence and prevent a potentially more deadly second wave of infections. I want to know what your thoughts are about the apps, and are they a good idea?
Okay, well, it's a great question. I think the most important thing for people to understand in order to make their own view about whether contact tracing apps are something that they want to download on their phone, because it is something that each one of us individually is being asked to make a decision about. Now, where it stands at the moment is that I haven't downloaded the Australian app yet, and I say the word yet on purpose, because I may still do it. But right now, there's a few things that haven't happened that I would like to see happen first. But in order to kind of make sense of that, you have to go back to just contact tracing without an app. So contact tracing is an age-old public health intervention. And it's basically, in this virus, one of the basic things that we have to try and keep ourselves safe. So forget about the app, just set the app aside for a minute. The way that it works is, in the past, tuberculosis, AIDS, all kinds of communicable diseases, we have had to find people who are ill. They usually come to hospital, they show up. We have to sit down with them, we have to do this extensive interview, find out who they've been in contact with, get in touch with every single one of those people, and depending on the disease, so for a COVID-like disease, people may not have symptoms, they may never get symptoms, or they may be pre-symptomatic, but we have to ask them to quarantine themselves, not to go out. We have to then find out who they've been in contact with, and so on until you can basically contain the disease. So that's how it works. And as you can hear from that, and I don't think you recognize this, it's extremely intrusive. It means that what happens is, if you go to your doctor, unlike a normal situation, you get diagnosed with a cold or a cancer, nobody gets notified. If you get diagnosed with a communicable disease, a health authority does get notified. They know that you have that disease. And that means they come knocking on your door or calling you on the phone, asking you and telling you what it is you're going to have to do to keep the community safe, asking you about your contacts, which is a very privacy invading kind of intervention. We've never given that a second thought. We understand sometimes that kind of thing has to happen. Why does it have to happen? Because sometimes our individual privacy and our liberty, which is what's impeded when they tell us we can't go out, sometimes those things are less important than keeping the rest of the community safe. So that's the background, and interestingly, not controversial. Nobody's ever raised a fuss about it, and nobody's raised concerns about the fact that we have laws that give our public health officials some pretty extensive powers when it comes to this kind of thing. So when it comes to diseases that can impact us seriously, they can step in, they can ask us, but ultimately they can tell us what we have to do to keep ourselves, but also other people safe. Now,
so why haven't you downloaded?
That's right. It's a good
okay.
question. So now enter the contact tracing app. So all the contact tracing app is an adjunct. It's something in addition to what we would normally have. Because if you think about it, with this disease, you could have been actually in contact with the person who might have infected you, and you might be infected a couple of weeks ago. Now, while we're social isolating, it's probably not that hard to think about who we've been in contact with. But when you're running a normal life, and that's what they're promising us, that we're going to get back to, getting on a bus, going to a supermarket, you don't know who you've actually been connected to. Movie theaters, think about all of these things. They're people you could be in contact with for over half an hour, which is the risk factor for this condition, but you don't know their name. And so what a contact tracing app allows is that, in the Australian context, and I'm just going to talk about the Australian app, it allows, if I've got it on my phone and the person next to me has got it on their phone and we're sitting together, say in a movie theater, it allows our phones to exchange information so that when I am diagnosed with COVID, say, and I agree to hand over my information, the government can see very accurately who I have been in contact with insofar as those people have the contact app. So as you can see, it's not going to work on its own. It's just going to help as an additional thing. So why haven't I downloaded it? Because it sounds so great. And it does sound great. And if it were the case that I had a lot of trust in our government, I would immediately have downloaded it. So one of the biggest problems that we've got around this app is, for years, people like me have been talking about the running down of public trust. And it's all been horrendously abstract. The running down of public trust, social capital, all of these things sounded very vague. It wasn't really kind of clear what the take home was, what the downstream consequence was. This is a perfect example of where you're reaping what has been sowed around government trust. So has our government handled this COVID outbreak well? Super well. They've done an absolutely great job. But in the past, have they handled our private data well? They have not. So there have been problems with the way the government, and this is both sides, I need to be clear about that they've handled metadata. There's been creep, so something called mission creep, where they've taken our private data for one purpose, and then they start using it for another. There's been the release of people's private data around the robo-debt crisis, where all of a sudden people's private information was suddenly released because it suited the government to do that. And there's a number of those instances. So what I'd like to see has not happened yet. What we've been told is the app will do this, the app won't do that, and yet we still don't have legislation. So do I trust that the government is going to legislate in every single way that they said they would? No, I'd like to see it. Do I trust that the computer code is exactly as the government has described it? No, they said they would release it. Haven't done it yet. So when they do those things, it's sort of a trust but verify approach is what I'm taking. When they verify that the things they've said are in place in regard to privacy, I'm going to download that app.
Leslie,
so the contagion has already spread. Is that what you're saying? You're going to wait for the contagion to spread. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I guess what I am saying is that because this is adjunctive and because we have done so well in Australia, that we have such low rates right now, it is entirely possible to do contact tracing without this app. And in fact, in the US, for instance, when you speak to people at Johns Hopkins, who are extremely informed and kind of some of the foremost authorities around managing communicable disease, they say that what we really just need to do is, in this climate where there's so many people out of work, is hire more human contact tracers. Because the reality is there's always going to have to be humans. You can't just get a text that says, oh, by the way, you might have COVID-19, go to the doctor. It's going to need to be more than that. You're going to need to have someone ring you up, explain what the implications are, calm you down, tell you where you can go for the test. If you need to quarantine, provide support for you so that you can actually do that. Maybe even provide an extra place for you to do it if you're living in a house where you can't effectively isolate. So there's always going to need to be humans. I trust that the humans have managed this all right in the past before smartphones, and they still can. But I also hope, I really hope, that we can use technology to help us do this even better. And so if the government delivers for me, George, I'll be downloading the app, and it won't just be me. There'll be other people who have a trust and verify approach who will be downloading it too.
Zuleyha?
Yeah, so I guess I feel like there's a bigger conversation here about privacy and trust. And I feel like this app is just one issue that's part of, as I said, a bigger issue. I mean, I would be inclined to download the app only because I would think, well, I don't really feel like I've got much privacy currently anyway, whether it's because of my mobile phone, because of social media. Well, what's one more app going to do? So what is your thoughts on that kind of thinking?
Well, look, I mean, obviously, if you think the battle has been lost and you're willing to cede the ground, then you're right. And there's certainly no doubt that in a wide variety of contexts, if you're on Facebook or if you even have a phone, which is really a tracking device that lets you make calls, we're already potentially sacrificing our privacy. However, corporate surveillance is different to government surveillance. Both of them have their risks and their inconveniences. In this particular context, we're talking about government surveillance. And so my background's Jewish. And one of the things that was, the most awful during the Holocaust was that people had given over their information. Every year, 10 years, we do this in the census. We give over our information and we disclose lots of things to the government. And we trust that they will keep and safeguard that information and not give it to somebody who ought not to have it for a use they should not use it for. And yet that is what actually happened. So I still feel like I can name non-good faith laws that have been passed around privacy. I can name violations of laws that we actually have to protect us. But I feel like I still live in a society where there is an idea that privacy should exist, and I'm not ready to give up the battle to have it continue to exist, even though we've had this enormous disruptor of the digital world, which makes it so much easier to violate our privacy and for the things that are taken from us to spread very widely and very quickly, such that we can end up feeling like, oh God, there's just nothing left to save. But I think we can claw that back, because I know that I've watched the growth of my own children and their consciousness around this. So they came into the world at a time right before phones, but they don't really remember a world without computer and phones. And I've watched them go from that kind of naive position of like, who cares? If they want to advertise to me, they can know anything they want about me. I've got nothing to hide, to all of a sudden wanting very much to have privacy. And that was unheard of for children that age. We've actually watched the maturity of those generations realize that privacy matters. And so I think we're all now on the same journey, believing that this new world is great, offers us lots of things, but like every technology, it can be misused and damage us. And the downside of these technologies, and there's a number of them, but one of them is this privacy problem. So I think we're in a clawback mode. I kind of agree with you that we've lost a lot, but I don't think all is lost. I think we can claw some of it back.
There are a number of countries around the world that don't have the same faith in their governments and would be most concerned about these contact tracing apps. One particular society that has taken a fearful hit, especially since 2014, is Turkey. And there have been some atrocities there, some restrictions placed on their society, and it's been confronting from outside, watching those people there persecuted. And I can understand the stance that you've taken. Although it's 70 years since the Holocaust, there is something that's very, very strong that we can't just dismiss. But I'm reminded again that these are extraordinary times. You have never lived in your time through a COVID-19 pandemic, have you?
Absolutely true. These are extraordinary times.
So is
So
this
I
when
take it that your
we?
point, therefore, is, extraordinary times, extraordinary measures. If we were ever going to kind of seed something easily, shouldn't it be now when there's so much
Yes,
concrete benefit? There's so much downside to not doing it, and there's so much concrete benefit for all of us to seed it now. But I guess
exactly, exactly.
I can't really see the either or. So just in terms of like getting really down and dirty with the specifics, we're not going to be changing anything radically in our environment until the 11th. That's when the next time, the government and the state governments meet and are likely to make a significant decision. So what's the hurry? I mean, at the moment, it's not going to be a live or die situation whether I download this thing today or whether I download it after the government does what it said it would do. And to be frank, if they really want me to do it now, they could do their end of the bargain right now. They're in fact kind of, in my view, dragging the chain. And I do think it's extraordinary times, but I think it's important to remember historically that it's always extraordinary times when we introduce things that tend to then never disappear and become permanent fixtures in our social and governmental life. So 9/11 was this extraordinary event in the US landscape. I'm an American born, so I can tell you that, nothing like that had ever been seen before. My family was, in New York at the time. It was really completely devastating. And in the wake of that, a lot of very significant erosions of the civil liberties of Americans were put into place that exist to this day. Because what we know historically is that once you give governments power, it is very, very difficult to get them to give it up. So to me, a couple of weeks that don't actually really matter in a kind of substantial way, insofar as nothing major is going to change in that period of time anyway, is a worthy investment to not put something in place that, if it goes badly, can be misused and maybe something that we actually can't get rid of later.
Zuleyha, there's always the suggestion that the reason why governments don't take back or drop or relinquish these responsibilities or these powers is that the threat is still there. How would you respond to what Leslie just gave us?
I guess it raises a lot of questions. And one thing that I was thinking as you're speaking, Leslie, is, you know your information quite well. The thing is, the decisions that are being made by the layperson is really based on things that they hear from, rumors or, social media. So they're not very intellectual decisions, but they're making decisions that do have implications for themselves and the wider community. So how do you make these kind of big decisions like you are, as in you're holding off, downloading this app, and you've thought about it. You've thought about, its pros and cons. But I don't think the wider society has those sort of decision-making information accessible or available, or they just don't read up on it. So we're all making these decisions without really knowing about its implications. As an ethicist, how do you deal with that?
The problems of democracy, right? I mean, this is an age-old problem. It goes all the way to the debates we have about whether or not you should have to demonstrate certain kind of areas of competency in order to vote, because your vote installs a government. I may have spent, my entire year, the previous year, getting informed about the decision I'm going to make, but I pull the lever just the same as somebody who decides at the absolute last minute that they're going to vote, Labor because they like red better than blue. So, this is just the inherent dilemma, nothing new here. I guess I feel like I think we've had now 2 million Australians who have downloaded this app. They're being a little bit cagey about how many people have to download it for it to be highly effective, although I think that they are correct that any adjunctive capacity that it provides is an improvement on nothing. So for the 2 million
Correct.
people who've downloaded it, even if no more than that download it, when those people are interacting with each other, their Bluetooth will exchange the information, and should one of them get sick, that additional information will be available for them and for everyone else who has the app. So I feel as if the only way that I can wrestle with my concerns about not everybody perhaps making as informed a decision as I would like is that I think what people do is self-select their information channels. Now, sometimes they make some very poor decisions, and I think we already, oh goodness, sorry. I think we already know that. We already know that there's a lot of poor decision making being made about what people listen to and how they decide to take that information on. But that's just so much of a bigger issue, like a super important one. Don't get me wrong, it's so important. But it throws us into the disinformation space. It throws us into the whole space around the narrowness and channeling of our conversation. And what's fascinating about this particular event is it's one of the few events that's happening to all of us. I think that is probably of the most interesting social event for us. It's been a medical event. It's been an economic event. It's also been a collective event. And so even though you can fairly say that we're all experiencing the same storm and there's a commonality in that, we're also all in different boats. And usually what people mean when they talk about that is they mean you might have a more, substantial boat and it's, going to protect you a lot better. You have a job, you have a partner, you have a dog, you have older kids, and somebody else might be in a leakier boat. But I also think it's that we also have different capacities to manage the stresses and the strains that this situation is putting on us. There's a lot of mental health strain, which some people are better and worse able to handle. And there's a lot of information strain. And that's your point. There's a lot of difficulty in terms of the mass amount of information that needs to be communicated to people should they truly be making at every juncture informed decisions. And that's not probably possible. But what is possible is for the government to do what it's doing, which I think it's doing a great job of. They have a coronavirus app and they're communicating very clearly on it. They have websites and are communicating very clearly on it. The national broadcaster also communicating extremely clearly. So I think if you expect people, because I think you have no choice but to expect people to funnel their information flows to the kind of amount and quality that they want and can handle, you would hope that what's available, and I think this is true, can inform them to the levels they want. So if you just want to tune into what the government says, for instance, it will tell you to download the app. Simple as that. It will say, download the coronavirus app. It will say, download the contact tracing app. Here's what it's going to do. Here's what it's not going to do. Here's what you worry about. Don't worry about this. Here's how to do it. Keep your phone, put your phone like this, end of story. So I guess all I can say is, I just hope that people tune into what they can handle and what they want to manage, like every other situation we face.
Dr. Leslie Cannold, I'm thrilled to bits that you've got the Bluetooth ready to go, but I also understand very well that you need a couple of things that the government needs to follow through. If those things are done, I'm sure that the next expectation is that you'll do as you've just told us and download the app.
I absolutely will be downloading the app. So we'll all be kind of hanging out waiting for the vote to happen and for the code to be released. And everyone will be saying, hallelujah, Leslie's downloaded the app.
And you know what? It'll be because Leslie encouraged them to take the next step. Right. So Leslie, we're so thrilled that once again you've made yourself available. Thank you very, very much for taking us through a journey and helping us to understand the complexities of this thing called privacy, this thing called trust, and this thing that calls us at a special time. We're in this together. We're a unique community under enormous load, and with everybody pulling their weight, I'm sure we'll make it through to the other end. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks to both of you, and Ramadan Mubarak.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie.
See ya.
Well, I've never seen a more animated doctor. Leslie Cannold did a great job, and
very passionate.
So have you. can you believe we've made it through our first hour together, and your co-hosting has gone seamlessly? Have you enjoyed
George.
it?
With your support, it's been fantastic. Yes, somewhat. Somewhat I have.
Now, listen, wherever you might be, and you have been watching this episode of Ramadan Conversations, we want to take this opportunity to thank you, both of us. The next episode of Ramadan Conversations is scheduled for tomorrow, and it will be coming from Hong Kong. As for this particular episode, it will be uploaded to the AIS YouTube channel. They'll be doing that very, very shortly. However, our next Melbourne broadcast airs on Monday, the 8th of May. I wonder if they've hooked you in to do another hosting, Zuleyha.
Yeah, I think they wanted me to get through this before they suggested that one. But we'll see what happens. Let's see who turns up on the 8th of May, George, alongside you.
Fantastic. All right. Well, the series thus far has featured a host of distinguished guests. And should you wish to catch up on previous conversations or view this particular one again, you can do them all, of course. Catch them up on the Affinity YouTube channel. So as everyone has been telling us to do for much of the hour, stay safe and have a blessed Ramadan. Zuleyha, thank you for joining me.
Nice. Thank you, George.